So don't let where you are dictate where you're going. That's what we're talking about today, and it's all coming right up. Do you know in your game of life that you start out with every one of the cards, all of them? No one else holds those cards. You hold all your own cards in your game of life. But what if I told you that throughout our life, we give away a few of those cards here, a few there, until we end up to where we have very few cards left? The reason I want to talk about this is that's where I found myself several months back, to where I felt like I'd given out all of my cards. I had nothing left. So how do you get those cards back? The first thing that you got to do is recognize that there's something missing. My wife says that I've been missing my mojo. She even told her friend that, Amy. Amy told me the other day, she said, Tina just says that you've kind of lost your mojo. And you know what? I have for a long time, because I let other people continue to hold those cards that I've given away. And I decided, that's not going to happen anymore. It can't happen anymore. And whether you're in a sales job or whether you're in a working retail, whatever you do in your life or with your family, at times you can feel like you're just spent. You have no cards left. But what if I told you there's a way that you can get every one of those cards back, every one of them, to create your deck again? It's not impossible. But what it takes is what we talked about before, is you have to have I talked about on a video called A Winner's Mindset. You have to get that winner's mindset back. And the way that you do that is to start focusing on yourself. And I don't mean being selfish and doing what you want to do. I'm talking about healing your wounds, but also being positive while you're doing it. If you sit back and want to blame everyone else for where you are in your life, you've got no one to blame but the person staring you back in the mirror. Because a lot of times we put ourselves in situations that we shouldn't, but we can change that. No one is holding our cards but us. So take your cards back, and here's what you do. You realize that you hold the whole deck once again. It's just like if you're playing blackjack and you lost a hand, and then after the cards run, they reshuffle and hand them back to you. Imagine your life was just reshuffled and you got the whole deck of cards back again. I think back in my life, and that's happened several times. I've owned several businesses. Some have been very successful, some not so successful. But one thing that I realized about myself is that I always moved on to the next thing. I always said, okay, that didn't work for some reason, whatever, my fault, whatever. But you got to realize that you don't stop where you are, because where you are does never dictate where you want to go. And when we start letting where we are dictate where we're going, we'll always remain stuck. We won't be able to move forward, and that's what this channel is about, is moving forward. The way that you do that is you have to have your heart and your mind connected to where you decide nothing is going to stop me with what I want to do. Nothing. When I wanted to start a pawn business, this was back in the early 90s. I worked for a guy that had a pawn shop, and he had promised me if I helped him build his staff that he would open another store and I could run that store and own 50% of that store. So I hired some great people, trained them off, trained hundreds of salespeople in my life. And then I realized that he wasn't going to follow through with what he had promised. So we had a discussion, and he pretty much told me that, nah, he's comfortable with where everything was. Well, of course he was, because I was making him a ton of money. And so I jumped out on a limb and left and opened my own store. And a lot of people thought I was crazy because I was making great money. I was making over $100,000 a year for this guy. But I thought, I can do this. The only thing holding me back from doing it is money. You have to have money to run a pawn shop. So I found an investor, and that investor happened to be my mom and dad. My mom wasn't too keen on it, but my dad believed in me, and he's the one that I just recently did a video on. I lost my dad, and it's still fresh with me. But I started this pawn shop, and I really started doing well, and it kept growing and growing and growing. But what happened was, a little bit along the way, I started giving my cards away. And how did I do that? I started letting things slide, and hiring some people that I probably shouldn't have hired, and losing my focus and my train of thought of why I started it in the first place. I started making a lot of money, and then I let the money be my focus rather than what I really wanted in that business. I wanted to have a pawn business where I actually did help people and didn't have to screw over people and didn't have to deal with people that were thieves and bringing stuff in. I wanted to help people that had nowhere else to go, and I didn't want to take advantage of people. But I lost that along the way because I started just looking at the money side of it. And that's when I got off track, and I found myself 13 years later, I had grown my business so big. I built a new $1 million building, built a motorcycle dealership, a restaurant and a bar upstairs, and had a big business. And then 2007 hit, and the custom bikes that I had for sale, 2 of my major companies went out of business, and I'm sitting there with 30 motorcycles that are $40,000 and $50,000 motorcycles that I couldn't sell. And the economy started tanking, stocks started tanking, and people weren't worried about motorcycles. They were worried about just feeding their families. So long story short, I lost my business, and it was a punch in the gut. But at that point in my life, I still had my MOJO. So I started another business, and I started a taxidermy business, which sounds funny, but I had never done taxidermy in my life. And when all the dust settled, we had to go bankrupt, and we lost everything we had, and so did my parents. And that was a really tough thing to get over, a punch in the gut for our whole family. But I thought, I can't stop here. I've got to do something with my life. And I started thinking about it, and I thought, you know what? I love art. I love animals. I'm thinking about taxidermy school. My wife's like, really? I said, that's what I'm thinking about. And I've got a great wife because she supports most of my crazy ideas, unless they're just way crazy. But I started this taxidermy business, and I grew it over 7 years to where I was doing taxidermy work for the country singer Craig Morgan. I had 18 months worth of work at all times. I started building my credit back. We lived over in a small house. I had my shop in my backyard, and I started building a business. I hired a young man that I love dearly, Nayland, and we started working together, and I started getting closer with God, and my life started to change. But then something else started to change. I started getting my desire back to really wanting to get out of where we were living, because it was a rougher neighborhood and there was drugs moving in, and I didn't want my family there. My kids were still young, and I wanted to move somewhere where I could have my kids. I got my kids on the weekends, and I was previously divorced, and I didn't want my kids to be subjected to where I was living. So I got an opportunity to go to work for Lowe's as a outside sales rep. And when I did that, I could have sat back and thought, I live in this quaint little house, and I could have said, well, this is all I can do right here. But I've never had that real mindset. I've had the mindset that I want to be number one, because that's just who I am. And when I went to work for Lowe's, there's 1,700 Lowe's stores, and I ended up being in the top 10 2 years in a row in the United States, and I was working in West Virginia, which is a very small market compared to the markets we were fighting against. The guy that had my job previously sold about $500,000, and they thought that was a pretty good job. I sold almost $2 million every year. I blew it out of the water. But then I think I talked about on a previous video about how my anxiety and depression took over, and I kind of got myself out of sorts when we had a new management change. And then here's what I'm thinking about with those cards. I allowed someone else to hold my deck of cards. Not one, not two. I gave them a whole deck of cards because I let someone else dictate what was going to go on with my life. And I ended up quitting that job, a great job. And to this day, I regret that. I should have stayed there, but I didn't. So then I went on, and I thought, I've met a lot of contractors, so I went to work for one of the contractors as a sales rep. And within about 8 or 9 months, they promoted me to sales manager, and I had about 12 guys under me, and it was in the roofing sales. And we really blew it out of the water. We did very well. But once again, I got to where I trusted people so much, and I handed my cards over to these other people. And it came down to it, I'd earned a $120,000 bonus. And come the end of the year, they only gave me half my bonus and told me they were going to roll the rest of it over into the next year. And It didn't set well with me. I thought, you're not keeping the money that I was promised because I worked my tail off to get this. So I walked out on that job. There again, I gave away all of my cards. So I gathered myself, went to work for another roofing company, but this time I was just an independent contractor. And I went up, one of my first big jobs that I went up and I was bidding against that company that had done that to me. And I got that job, and it was a $600,000 job that I sold. And we weren't even in the running for the bid, but I'd made up my mind that I was going to have a chance at that bid, so I called the person that was in charge of the bidding and I talked my way into it. And that's what a good salesperson does, and I'm a good salesperson. So we get the job, and I do very well at it, and then the company that I'm working for decides they're going to start moving operations to Florida. One of the other owners lived there. They were great guys that I worked for. And I decided, I'm going to go and follow a dream I've always had, and I want to open a cigar shop and dust my cigars. I love my cigars. But I opened a cigar shop, and once again I gave away all of my cards in the beginning and didn't even realize it. The guy that was going to bankroll me wanted to be my partner, him and his wife, but I had a friend that I'd promised that I'd do it with him, and he didn't have any money, and at the time I didn't have any money. I was going to get a second mortgage on my house to do it, and I gave away my cards by saying, yes, I want this guy as my partner, and the other two said, well, we want half the business and don't want him to be in the business. And I said, well, I can't do that to my friend, and I wouldn't do that. Well, they came back and said, you know what, you showed the kind of character you have, so we're going to back you. So they backed me and my friend. And just as a pause right here, this isn't a slam at anyone, but I gave away all my cards by trusting people that I should have never trusted. I ended up 2 years later, the gentleman that I fought for to be in there went behind my back and partied with the other two and ended up pretty much kicking me out of my own business. And man, that kicked me hard. It really did. And at that time, I realized once again, I'd given my cards away, and by now I didn't even know how to get my cards back. I thought, I don't have money to fight them in court. I went from making $150,000 a year to making $50,000 a year in the cigar shop because it was a dream that I'd had. So when you take $100,000 a year out of your earnings, it's tough to have money sitting there to do anything with. And I talked about on a previous video how I started this channel and I sold several personal items to be able to buy the equipment to even have this channel. And little by little I started taking my cards back, but I still didn't have a full deck. And I know where the jokes are going, you've never had a full deck. Well, no, I haven't. I've always been the person that if I think of doing something and my heart and mind's in it, I do it. I don't have the fear, and I just do it. But something about this last time was different because I'd given away so much of my heart and my soul into trusting people, and it was taken from me. And it really, really was hard to come back from. And here it is 8 or 9 months later, and I've got my cards back. So what am I going to do now? I'll be letting you know in several weeks what I'm doing now. But I do have that back. So why am I telling you all this? I'm just letting you know this, that you always hold your cards. You're only showing your cards to these people. You're not giving them away. But in your mind, you think you've given them away so that you don't have a full deck anymore and you don't have anything to play with. And that's not true. You don't have to have money to start a business. There's people that if you can get them to believe in what you're doing, they'll back you. You don't have to have the exact right people around you because you can grow into that. But your mind will start giving you roadblocks of why you shouldn't do something, why you shouldn't take a chance. Well, your mind's going to tell you, well, you failed before, give it up. I'm just not built to be the person that goes and punches a clock in a 9-to-5 job. That's not who I am. I'll never do that. I'll never be happy doing that because that's not who I am. And I'm not telling you my story just to get my story out there. I'm telling you my story to hope that it coincides with maybe your story, to where if you're doing something that you feel like is just not you, you've got all your cards. No one else has your cards. The problem is that we give up. We give up on ourselves. We give up on fighting for what we want. We give up, and it's really because we lose. You lost your mojo, baby. No, you don't lose your mojo. You lose your heart. You lose your desire and your drive because depression and anxiety kick in, and it overwhelms you to where you can't have confidence in yourself anymore. And I'm thankful that I've got that confidence back now, because it's taken me a while. This is the longest it's ever taken me to overcome something in my life. But I think I'll be a better and stronger and smarter person because of it. And I'll quit showing people and giving away all of my cards. And the people that are standing back wanting you to fail are the people that are afraid to try anything on their own. They're fearful of what you may become. And that's the truth. They're afraid of you competing with them on any level with anything they're doing, because they know that you'll beat them, because they know your heart and they know your drive. So don't let anyone hold your cards. And that's pretty much all I've got for you. I just want you to know that. Don't let anyone hold your cards, because they're your cards. Nobody else holds them but you. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, hit me a like button so that you can let YouTube know that you enjoyed it, so they can share it with someone else. Subscribe to my channel. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so that you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. And this is a little bit different video than usual. My name's Tom Folks, and my channel's Moving Forward with Tom. And it's usually about depression and anxiety, and this really has something to do with that also, because a lot of times it's our depression and anxiety that keeps us from moving forward. But never, ever stop moving forward. And that's all I got for you today. Thanks.